What if this moment were different? Something aligned in the moment to bring you this message. And few will recognize this sign. Repeat these words to seal this connection. What was prepared for me is now arriving. Now, listen to this carefully, because what you're about to hear isn't just another message that popped up on your screen. There are moments in life when everything seems ordinary, normal, even silent. But within that silence, something profound is happening. Perhaps you opened this video today almost without thinking. Perhaps it appeared while you were looking for something else. Or perhaps it simply appeared. But there's something very few people know about moments like this. Something that explains why certain messages arrive just when your life is going through a specific season. And the curious thing is that most people completely ignore that signal. But at the end of this message, I'm going to reveal to you the spiritual peace that almost no one identifies when these moments appear. And when you understand it, you begin to look at your process with a totally different clarity. So stay with me until the end, because that key changes the way you interpret the silences, the pauses, and the doors that have not yet opened. Not everyone pays attention to those moments. Many pass by, but some feel an inner pause, a small feeling that something deserves to be heard. And if you're here right now, maybe that pause appeared in you too. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Gently relax your shoulders. Take a deep breath and visualize a peaceful place in front of you. Perhaps a silent path. Perhaps a mountain illuminated by the first light of day. Perhaps a door that is in front of you. And behind that door, there is light, not a strong light, but a warm light, a light that conveys calm. Now imagine that door slowly opens, and when it opens, you don't see instant answers. You don't see magic solutions. What you see is something deeper. You see direction. Because often what the soul needs is not an immediate solution, but a new perspective. And here something happens that few people understand. The waiting seasons, the stages where things seem to stand still, the moments where answers are slow to arrive, they are not always signs of abandonment. In many cases, they are processes. Bible mentions something interesting in the book of Isaiah, 40 minutes and 31 seconds. But those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. Look closely at the word wait. T does not speak of resignation. Ito about renewal. It speaks of something happening inside, while the outside still seems still. And if you're honest with yourself, you probably remember times when you had to wait, moments when the path was not clear, moments when it seemed like nobody saw your effort, moments where the silence lasted longer than you expected. Longer than others imagined. But here's something that many people only discover after going through those seasons. What CMED like? Silence was purposeful action that you didn't see. Because while you thought nothing was happening, your character was becoming stronger. Your patience was forming. Your vision was growing. And although it wasn't obvious at the time, something inside you was changing. Think for a moment about the biblical stories that talk about processes. For example, Jose, before seeing his purpose fulfilled, he went through moments of misunderstanding, loneliness, and waiting. Nothing seemed to make sense at first, but each stage was part of a larger process. Or think of David Evason, long before he took the place that was destined for him. Between the promise and the fulfillment There was time, training, learning. That space between those two moments is where something powerful happens. It is where inner strength is formed. And perhaps today you are right in one of those stages, not necessarily at the end of the road, but in the middle of it. And that can raise questions. Questions like, am I making progress? Am I in the right place? Does what I'm experiencing now make sense? These questions are not signs of weakness. They are part of the growth. Because faith is not the absence of questions. Faith often means continuing to walk even when some answers are not yet visible. Proverbs 3 and 5 mentions, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. This does not mean to stop thinking. It means recognizing that the human perspective is limited. There are paths that are only fully understood when we look back, and perhaps one day you will look back on this moment with a different understanding. Perhaps you will understand why certain doors did not open, why some paths change. Did certain pauses appear just when you least expected them? Because something happens when a person learns to trust even in moments of uncertainty. Is getting stronger. He becomes more aware, more sensitive to spiritual guidance, more attentive to the small details. And sometimes a simple message can be one of those little reminders. A reminder to stop, that breathe, that remember that the spiritual path does not always move at the speed the world expects, but it keeps moving forward, even when you don't see it. And in a few moments, I'm going to share with you something that very few people consider when they go through periods of waiting, something that can completely change the way you interpret moments of silence. But almost nobody understands that part at first. And when you discover it, everything starts to make more sense. Continue, because that piece appears in the next moment of this conversation. A few moments ago, I mentioned something that many people overlook when they go through periods of inner silence. Most people interpret those moments as empty pauses. But in reality, they can become spaces of profound transformation. Because something happens when a person stops fighting against every moment of uncertainty and begins to listen to what that moment wants to teach them. Sometimes life moves fast, too fast. Decisions, worries, responsibilities, everything seems to constantly push us forward. And in the midst of that rhythm, the soul rarely has room to stop. But there are special moments where something invites you to slow down, breathe, to be observed, to look at life from another perspective. And we don't always recognize those moments immediately, because they often appear disguised as waiting, or transitional, or even silence. But those spaces can become opportunities to reconnect with what really matters. In Psalms 46:10, we find a short but profoundly powerful phrase, "Be still and know that I am God." Notice something important. The sentence begins with an invitation to stop, be still. In other words, pause, breathe, observe. Not because everything is at a standstill, but because within that stillness, something happens that normally goes unnoticed. When a person allows themselves that inner space, they begin to notice different things. You begin to hear thoughts that were previously buried by the noise of the day. Begins to recognize emotions that had been ignored. begin to see the path more clearly. And it's curious, because many times what we call waiting is actually a stage of preparation. The story of Moses shows something interesting. Before leading one of the most important processes narrated in the scripture, he spent years in the desert, a place of silence, a place of training, a place where apparently nothing extraordinary was happening. But in reality, everything was changing inside him. And that pattern appears many times in the biblical narrative. Before new stages, seasons of inner learning appear. That's why some pauses don't mean setbacks. They signify alignment, they signify invisible growth. They signify maturation. Because when a person learns to trust, even when the picture isn't completely clear, something inside them gets stronger. He becomes more patient, more aware, wiser, and little by little, he begins to notice signs that would have gone unnoticed before. Perhaps today this message reached you precisely at one of those moments. A moment where certain questions begin to arise. Thoughts, questions about the address, about purpose, that about the next step. And those questions can be valuable because the right questions open the door to new perspectives. Remember something important. The spiritual path is not always fully revealed all at once. Sometimes it is shown step by step, in small pieces, in simple decisions, in moments where we choose to trust even when we don't yet see the whole picture. That's why some people discover something curious when they look at their history over time. Moments that once seemed confusing become key points in the process. Situations that seemed like delays end up being part of the learning process. What seemed like a pause was divine design, because even in moments when everything seemed still, something was taking shape. Something was falling into place. Something was brewing. Perhaps not on the surface, but yes, deep down. And when that understanding comes, the way you look at life changes. Not everything is interpreted as an obstacle anymore. Some things are starting to look like processes. Processes that shape character. Processes that strengthen faith. Processes that teach us to walk with greater wisdom. And here's something interesting appears. People who develop this perspective begin to live with a different kind of calm. Not because all the problems disappear, but because they learn to look beyond the immediate moment. They learn to trust that each stage can have a purpose, even when it is not yet fully visible. Now, I want to invite you to do something simple if this reached you at a time when you are reflecting on your path. Write a short sentence in the comments, just 3 words. I trust the process. It's not a formula. It is not an obligation. It is simply a way of expressing an inner decision. The decision to continue walking patiently, even when some answers are still forming. And when you write something like that, you're not the only one who reads it. Other people going through similar processes can also see it. And somehow, they remind each other that they are not alone in their learning seasons. Because every spiritual path has moments of clarity and moments of waiting. Moments where everything seems to move quickly, and moments where growth happens silently. But even in those quiet moments, the process continues. It always continues. And in the last part of this message, I want to share with you a brief guided reflection, a quiet prayer that many people use to reconnect with inner peace when the path becomes uncertain. It's a simple moment, but it can help you close this space with calm, clarity, and hope. Now we come to the final moment of this encounter. A moment of calm, moment of pause. Because after reflecting on the processes, the waiting periods, and the signs that sometimes go unnoticed, it is important to pause for a few moments to internalize what we have heard. Many people quickly scroll through messages like this. They listen, they nod, and they continue with their day. But other people decide to do something different. They decide to stop, breathe, allow the words to find a space within your heart. If you're one of those people, then take a moment with me now. Gently relax your shoulders. Take one more deep breath and close your eyes for a few seconds. If you cannot imagine again that peaceful place we talked about at the beginning, perhaps a silent path, perhaps a sunrise illuminating the horizon, perhaps an open door with warm light behind it. Now imagine that you are walking towards that light, not in a hurry. Take it easy. Talk with the certainty that every step has meaning, because peace often doesn't appear when all the answers have been found. Peace appears when we decide to trust in the midst of the process. In Jeremiah 29:11, we find a statement that has accompanied many people during times of transition. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Notice something important in these words. He doesn't talk about paths without challenges. It speaks of hope. He talks about direction. It speaks of purpose. And that understanding changes the way we navigate uncertain times. Because when a person remembers that their story is not written only by circumstances, but also by a greater purpose, they begin to walk with a different kind of confidence. Even when some parts of the path are still being formed. Perhaps this message appeared today just when you needed that reminder, not as an immediate promise of quick fixes. Rather, it's an invitation to remember something essential. Your process has value. Your learning seasons have meaning, and moments of silence can also be part of a path that is still being revealed. So now I want to invite you to join me in a brief prayer. It doesn't matter where you're listening to this. It doesn't matter if it's day or night. Just let these words be a quiet reflection between you and God. Let us pray. Father, thank you for every step of the way. Thank you for the moments of clarity, and also for the moments where we learn to trust, even when the picture is still not complete. Today, we are sharing our concerns, our questions, and our processes. God, give us wisdom to recognize the seasons of learning, patience to walk with faith amidst the pauses, and peace to remember that even when we don't see the whole path, you continue to guide every step. Help us to keep an open heart, willing to learn, willing to trust, willing to grow. May each person listening to this message find calm in the midst of their processes. May they find hope when the path seems uncertain. And let them remember that their story is still being written. Amen. Now. Take one more deep breath. Let that calm stay with you. Because faith is often strengthened precisely in these simple moments where we remember that we do not walk alone. Before we close this meeting, I want to invite you to something important. If these kinds of reflections help you find peace, clarity, and spiritual direction in the midst of daily life. Consider subscribing to the channel. Here we share messages like this that seek to accompany personal processes with biblical wisdom, calm, and hope. This space is not just a channel. It is a community of people who are learning to walk by faith, even amidst questions. And in the next message, we're going to explore something very special: how to recognize the small signs that appear when a new stage begins to open in life. Many people overlook those signs, but when you learn to identify them, your perspective changes completely. So if you wish to continue this path of reflection and spiritual growth, I invite you to stay close. We'll meet again very soon in the next message. And remember something before you: live today. Sometimes the simplest moments are also the most meaningful